blue hour on a cold New Hampshire night, a battered Saturn sits half off Route 112. Its hazard lights a faint stutter against falling snow. Emergency tape flutters. A flashlight beam slices through powdered breath. There is no driver. A 21-year-old nursing student vanished from the roadside as if swallowed by the dark between telephone poles and pine. A single ATM receipt and a scattered life left behind. Highways promise escape, speed, anonymity. Here they became a question mark. Tonight we travel those ribbons of asphalt that swallowed people whole. 5 disappearances that refused to stay buried in the gravel. Each story is small-town terror and long-distance mystery, threaded by loneliness and gaps in the record. Before we dive in, welcome to the Archive 47, where secrets are unveiled. On February 9th, 2004, 21-year-old Maura Murray left her college in Amherst and drove into the snowy hills of New Hampshire. She stopped at an ATM in Keene, withdrew cash, and told a clerk she had a small problem with her car before continuing down dark rural roads. Hours later, a passing motorist found her black Saturn half off Route 112 near Haverhill. Its nose pressed into a snowbank and the driver's door closed. A scrape marked the bumper and a folded receipt lay in a pocket. The roadside had the unsettling stillness of a life reduced to a scene. Investigators and volunteers assembled a timeline that never quite closed. Responding officers documented footprints leading from the vehicle into the tree line where they vanished, and they found no clear evidence of a violent struggle at the crash site. Phone records and regional surveillance offered frustrating blanks. No outgoing calls were placed from the car, and no camera footage traced her route through that rural stretch. Eyewitness memories diverged. One motorist later reported seeing a woman walking along the shoulder, while another remembered only the blinking hazard lights. From those slender facts, hypotheses multiplied. Some concluded Maura panicked after the accident and walked into the woods seeking help, then suffered an accidental death from exposure or injury. Others believed an opportunist stopped to offer aid and then abducted her. A smaller contingent proposed she had staged a disappearance and begun a new life elsewhere. Each theory met counter-arguments. There was no definitive sighting placing her in another vehicle, no recovered CCTV showing her elsewhere, and no single forensic finding that closed the case. What sustained public interest was how the case intersected with the rise of collective online investigation. Message boards, podcasts, and volunteer search teams treated receipts, gas stops, and rural maps as material for reconstruction. Volunteers organized searches, overlaid travel logs on satellite imagery, and replayed the hours until new patterns seemed to emerge or dissolve. The image of a lone Saturn on Route 112, with hazard lights blinking into falling snow, became shorthand for a modern disappearance, specific, small, and stubbornly unresolved. The case continues to draw investigators and strangers back to that cold stretch of road. Next, the lens pulls back from a single scene to a corridor that has swallowed generations. In British Columbia, Highway 16, known now as the Highway of Tears, stretches hundreds of miles through dense forest and thin services, a lifeline between remote communities and the outside world. For decades, it also became a route of loss. Young women, disproportionately indigenous, who disappeared while trying to move between towns, catch a ride or get home. Official police work and community lists do not match cleanly. The RCMP's E-PANA task force ultimately focused on a subset of cases and tied fewer than 20 murders and disappearances into that investigation, while Indigenous leaders and families insist the human cost is far higher. Estimates vary from dozens into the many dozens. The stories along Highway 16 are not single note. Some victims were last seen hitchhiking. Others vanished from bus stops or after nights out. Families tell of delayed or fragmented investigations, of evidence degraded by distance and time, and of bureaucratic categories that left cases uncategorized or under-resourced. Public vigils, documentaries, and campaigns for better transit and attention grew into a movement that links these disappearances to the wider crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women, an insistence that roads don't merely take bodies, but also reveal entrenched social failures. Across the continent, in Virginia, a different but equally chilling pattern haunted the Colonial Parkway in the late 1980s. What should have been moonlit lovers' lanes and scenic pullouts became the setting for a string of double homicides. Young couples found slain or vanished near the Parkway, cars abandoned or moved, relationships and dates turned into fragments of evidence. The small details are unnerving. Vehicles left near rest areas, one car driven away from a scene, victims bound by circumstance more than geography, and investigators debated whether a single predator or multiple killers were at work. The violence felt intimate and predatory, a calculated violation of privacy that made public spaces suddenly unsafe for anyone in a pair. Both corridors, one a long northern highway, the other a wooded Virginia byway, share a cruelty of design. Places meant for transit where the margins are thin, the help far away, and the record of what happened often incomplete. Highways in these stories become envelopes of silence that demand louder answers. Brianna Maitland's disappearance tightened like a knot in a small Vermont town. On March 19, 2004, she finished a shift at the Black Lantern Inn and drove away. The next afternoon, her 1985 Oldsmobile was found backed into the side of an abandoned farmhouse about a mile from the restaurant. Paychecks, loose change, and personal items were left in and around the vehicle, and the car's position, rear end shoved into weathered siding, became one of the clearest, strangest facts the case offered investigators and family alike. In a small town, rumor rushes in to fill gaps left by thin timelines. Several motorists later reported seeing the car at odd hours, headlights or a flashing turn signal, and at least one passerby later described a person near the old Dutchburn house. Friends spoke of a note Brianna left for a housemate and an unsettled pattern of living that complicated early assumptions. Crucially, the car's discovery was not immediately tied to her absence, which cost investigators the first hours when forensic traces are freshest. That slow early window turned the case into a long puzzle of re-interviews, renewed searches, and intermittent leads. Half a world and a different landscape away, the Australian outback offers vanishings shaped by distance and isolation. In May 1991, a man who had recently purchased a vehicle in Brisbane later had that car discovered abandoned at a remote rest area on the Landsborough highway east of Longreach. Local reporting and missing persons records indicate that some of his belongings were subsequently recovered at separate, isolated sites along surrounding routes. An unnerving scatter that suggested either travel across great distances or that items had been carried and discarded on different stretches of road. Both stories underline the same cruel geometry. Highways connect lives and livelihoods, and yet their margins can be places where help is thin and evidence quickly fades. Maura Murray's disappearance remains officially unsolved. New Hampshire's cold case unit and the FBI still consider the file active, issuing an age-progressed image and public appeals as document disclosures and renewed searches keep the case visible. The Highway of Tears shows how grief became advocacy. Families, Indigenous leaders, and community groups have pushed for decades to implement symposium recommendations and the national calls for justice. In Virginia, the Colonial Parkway killings saw a notable development when investigators linked DNA to a deceased suspect in several cold cases, giving families identification if not full legal closure, and reframing decades of speculation. That link narrows possibilities but leaves broader questions about related unsolved incidents. Some cases show the partial power of modern forensics. In Brianna Maitland's Disappearance, police reported a DNA match to material from her vehicle, and in 2024, the FBI and Vermont State Police offered a reward to generate tips. The case remains active.